If education is the key to success in this country, and a degree from a brand name school is a virtual guarantee of future wealth and power, and we believe it is, then one of the most important questions we can ask about America is this: how exactly do you get into a prestigious university? What are the standards? Well, remarkably, nobody really knows the answer. College admissions is a bewildering mystery to most of us. It's a treasure map with the directions obscured. And that's not an accident. Colleges consistently refuse to explain how they admit students. Usually it takes legal action to find out. Secrecy is the key to their power, and they guard it jealously. But there are some facts available. Thanks to whistleblowers in college admissions offices and a series of civil rights lawsuits filed over the years, we do know something about admission standards. The main thing to understand going in is that no matter what you may have heard, higher education is not really a meritocracy. There aren't a lot of slow kids at Harvard, but that doesn't mean the smartest and hardest working applicants get in. Often they don't get in. Other factors come into play. The first and probably least publicized of these is legacy admissions. You're more likely to get into a prestigious school if your parents went there. Much more likely, it turns out. A 2011 study of 30 elite universities found that the children of undergraduate alumni were, on average, 45% more likely to get in. An earlier study found the legacy advantage was equivalent to an additional 160 points on the SAT. That's a major leg up. Colleges understand that admitting the kids of alumni help with fundraising. They don't like to talk about that, but it's true. The other factor that colleges don't like to talk about is affirmative action. The Supreme Court banned the use of racial quotas in admissions some years ago, but in real life, that decision meant nothing. Skin color remains a central consideration at every level of the process. The average admissions office is every bit as race-conscious as any institution in the Jim Crow South, and far less transparent about it. The numbers tell the story. Every study, there have been a few of them, has shown a huge discrepancy between the achievement that colleges require of applicants of different racial groups. This is true at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. The new analysis of recent data from the Association of American Medical Colleges, for example, found that African-American students with low scores in the med school admissions test and average grades had a 56% chance of getting into med school. At the other end, Asian students with the exact same scores and grades had a 6% chance of getting in. So facts like these have spurred lawsuits from groups and individuals alleging discrimination, and in every case, the data they've unearthed prove there's been discrimination. Defenders of the current system, though, say that nobody is being discriminated against and that race has nothing to do with these numbers. Of course, no one actually believes that. Consider this example. At Caltech, which has a rare race-neutral admissions policy, the student body was 43% Asian in 2013. At Harvard, which erects quotas against Asians, as it once did against Jews, that number was 18%, roughly where it has been for years, even as the number of Asian applicants has risen. When skin color becomes a criterion for admission, some people lose. But who exactly wins? No one ever asked that. Now, we know who's supposed to benefit. Affirmative action was designed to level the playing field for Americans whose ancestors had been discriminated against. Primarily, this meant black applicants. Yet 50 years after affirmative action began, the percentage of African Americans at many elite colleges appears to be dropping, even as schools boast about being diverse. How is that happening? Simple. Foreigners are taking their place. Under the rules of race-conscious admissions, the son of a Nigerian tycoon meets the same standards and checks the same box as the son of a single mother from the south side of Chicago. Both are black, so for the purposes of diversity goals, they're exactly the same. But in fact, they're not the same at all. One is poor, American, and descended from people brought to this country by force. You'd probably want to help that kid. The other is a rich foreigner, well-connected, and far more likely to have attended a selective private school. He doesn't need your help. Yet who has a better chance of leveraging diversity standards to get into Harvard? You know the answer. The rich kid does. He gets an advantage he hasn't earned and doesn't deserve, and that's a win for him. Harvard wins, too. It gets to brag about being inclusive. Meanwhile, the kid on the south side of Chicago doesn't go to college at all. This is happening at schools all over this country, and the trend is accelerating as immigration accelerates. A 2007 study found that among black students at the top 28 American universities, the percentage of immigrants was about double the representation in the broader population. At Ivy League schools, students from immigrant families accounted for fully 41% of black freshmen. At Harvard, a study 3 years earlier found that 2/3 of all black undergraduates were from immigrant backgrounds. This is the opposite of what affirmative action was designed to do. Yet over time, the definition of who is eligible for affirmative action has expanded even further, moving even farther away from where it began. In many places, illegal aliens now qualify for lower admission standards. Universally, identifying as Hispanic rather than white gives applicants the equivalent of 130 points on the SAT. So this is a huge advantage for newly arrived immigrants over native-born Americans. Yet it's puzzling if you think about it. Why should the descendant of Spanish conquistadors get preference over the great-grandchild of indentured Irish servants? What injustice is resolved by putting one over the other? How is that fair? How is it just? Well, of course, it isn't fair or just, which is why it is never explained or defended, only imposed. Americans lose in this arrangement. African Americans get shafted completely in favor of foreigners with no connection to this country or its history. Yet few complain about this because almost nobody really understands what is happening. And that's why the admissions process is secret, so you won't challenge it. Catherine Lehman is chairwoman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She spoke with us about all of this just a minute ago. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So what's the purpose of affirmative action? Why do we have it?
Well, the goal is to make sure that our colleges and universities have a chance to achieve the diversity that they say that they want for their schools, where the long-standing precedent is that they can use affirmative action if there are no other means to achieve that diversity and to be able to satisfy their educational mission.
So it's not an attempt to redress past wrongs. It's simply for the sake of variety.
Well, it started as an attempt to address past wrongs. I think that goal continues to exist, but the reality is that schools have, of long standing, said that what they want to do is to educate students to live in, work in, be prepared for an increasingly global society and to be able to be full participants in the world that they will enter. And so achieving diversity is one way of making sure that students are able to be educated toward that end.
So if you factor sports out of it, and this has been done, and you reduce it to grades and test scores, it still remains true that Asians, East Asians, Chinese particularly and Koreans, score like 500 points higher than other groups with the same admissions rates. And so
here's a flaw in your analysis.
Yes.
You're reducing it to the test scores and the grades, which the court has said specifically you cannot do. The schools, the colleges and universities have a First Amendment academic freedom interest in selecting whom they want to educate and how they want to educate them. And what they say is
I'm not contesting the right. I'm just saying it's prima facie discrimination. And if it were happening to any other group, of course, there would be a total outrage.
Well, I think it would be a total outrage if it were discrimination, period. What the court has said is that that's not how to analyze it, and that's not discrimination. The court has said you take a look at whether the school is analyzing all of who a child is.
No, I'm aware of what the court says. I don't think it passes the common sense test. But let me ask you this. Do you think if you conceded that part of the purpose of affirmative action, and I think the purpose that most Americans would identify with, if there's any part of it that they would, is the idea that there are groups in America, particularly African Americans, who are discriminated against historically, and this is a way of making good on that, or trying. So how does it make you feel when you see the numbers that foreign-born black students displace African-American students, especially at prestigious schools, at a really high rate, and then the school gets to say we're diverse when they're letting in, the kid of the Nigerian ambassador? Doesn't that seem a perversion of the purpose?
Well, I think it might be a perversion of the purpose. I haven't seen those numbers, and that's not my experience from investigating the schools. And in fact, what we're seeing now, in particular in this administration with its hostility to having people come to this country from other countries, we're seeing a drop-off in international students at our schools in a way that is affecting the bottom line of our
let's say, I'll get the exact numbers in a second, but let's say, I don't know, 19% of all black people in the United States were foreign-born, but the percentage of black students at prestigious schools who were foreign-born was like 45%. That would suggest that they're disproportionately getting the slots that most of us think are going to African Americans. You don't think that's a problem?
Well, again, we need to resist your reduction of the applicant to a particular characteristic rather than looking at the whole person.
Well, the schools, of course, reduce them to that. I mean, they're totally race conscious in the way that they do admissions.
You know, let me tell you that is just not true. That the schools are pretty opaque in the way that they do their admissions, and that's a problem for the American public. But I've overseen investigations in colleges and universities on exactly this topic, and what I've seen time and time and time again is that the schools actually do a very good job of taking a look at what the students say about themselves, what their recommenders say.
Okay, then my last question, we're almost out of time, is why can't we judge that for ourselves? Since this is the gateway to wealth and power in this country, a degree from a prestigious school, and the government subsidies are overwhelming, and the tax breaks are overwhelming, why don't I have a right to know what the criteria are that they're using? You
know, Tucker, I'm a huge believer in transparency. I think it would be better for the American public to have more information about that. When I was at the Office for Civil Rights, we entered into a resolution agreement with Princeton on this topic, and we evaluated exactly this question, and we made our analysis very public to be able to share what people's questions were and what our analysis was.
Well, good. Well, I'm totally with you on that. I think knowing more is better. Catherine, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.